Why can't I get my game signed? I've worked on it for so long. I've shown it to so many publishers. All my playtesters love it. I've written out the rules really clearly. I've done blind playtests, and I've refined my pitch many times, pitching to many different publishers all around the world. Many of the publishers say that they like the game, or that it's fine, but nobody actually wants to sign it. What am I doing wrong? I often get asked by newer designers, why aren't their games being signed by publishers, even when they think that they're solid, fun games, and that there's no glaring problems or flaws in them? In this video, I'm going to go over some reasons why I think some games don't get signed, even when they're perfectly fine and serviceable games. And to do so, I'll use some examples of my own prototypes, which I've worked on for many years, but have yet to find a home with a publisher, and in some cases, maybe they'll never find a home. And make sure you follow along till the end, because of the 5 prototypes I talk about, one actually ended up being published, and see if you can guess which one. Hi, I'm Matthew Dunstan. I'm a full-time board game designer based in Australia, and to date I've had over 60 games published all over the world. On this channel I like to talk about all things game design, from my own experiences in the industry to tips and tricks that can help you improve your own game design craft. So the first reason why your game isn't getting signed is that it's in a very crowded space of the market. In board games, as in a lot of culture, there are different trends that come and go, and as a trend peaks, you see a lot of games being released around a particular theme or mechanic. For example, in recent years, nature-themed games have been very popular, or a little bit further back there was a huge trend in microgames, typified by things like Love Letter. If you're trying to sign a game which is of the same type of many different games that are being released at the same time, it's going to be harder for publishers to say yes and want to publish your game, because it'll be harder to stand out from the crowd. And a related problem, if you have a game like this that is in a crowded space in the market, is that you might not be doing enough to make it obvious as to why your game is different from all those other ones that have already been published. You need to make it clear in your pitch why your game is different and why it's better than the other games on the market. It doesn't have to be better in every aspect, but it has to be better in at least one. Maybe it's more inventive. You're twisting the theme or mechanic in a way that hasn't been seen before. Maybe your game is quicker or has a better flow, so it might be more appealing to more casual gamers or families. Or it might have a really innovative component which isn't seen in the other games, even though the themes and mechanisms might be similar to those other games. You need to find some way to stand out. This isn't necessary with every game, but if you're pitching a game into a crowded market, then you're going to need it. Also to this point, games that don't have a clear hook are just even harder to pitch if they seem, on a surface level, very similar to other games that have already been published. I like to design a lot of card games, and card games especially, which give a bigger experience than what would you think would come in a small box of cards. One of my games, Village Rails, is a great example of this. It comes in a relatively small box and there's a few hundred cards, but there's actually a surprisingly meaty game inside that you can experience over and over again. And so I like to make lots of games like this. But being card games where you arrange things on a tableau doesn't do much to stand out necessarily. And so we come to the first of my prototypes, which hasn't found a home. So this is Up Park Avenue, and it's a co-design with Brett Gilbert. And we started designing it in 2018, so that's about 7 years ago now. And we've pitched it to pretty much everyone that we would think to pitch it to. We were very close to signing it once, but they never worked out in the end. And to date, it looks like it might never be published. It's a game inspired by the old Sim Tower game, if anyone out there knows it. And essentially, the game is made up of different cards, and you're stacking these cards to be the floors of different towers that you're building. And these different floors have different effects depending on how high they are up in the tower, or what other types of floors are in the tower or next to that floor in the tower. And you also have these topper cards which you put on the top of a tower to show when it's done, that give some extra scoring conditions. And you're basically trying to make the best points you can with building the towers that you have. And it's a cute theme and there are some fun combos, but there isn't anything to make it stand out. The way you get the cards is a fairly normal drafting kind of experience where you're picking cards from an open display. The idea of cards being types and comboing with each other to score different numbers of points has been seen in lots of different games. And there's nothing in the game that does much to distinguish itself from a lot of other simple family tableau building card games. And that's the kind of feedback that we get. I think the game is really good and a lot of fun, and there are some fun twists and quirks that we've put in the game. There's money that can be used to either potentially get more floor cards than you normally would, or you can pay money to invest in a floor and effectively double its scoring. But these are the kind of things that are really minor and don't really come out when you're pitching the game or even in the first couple of plays. It's not enough to make it stand out in a very crowded market. And so this one hasn't found a home. Or has it? The next game I'm going to talk about showcases 2 separate problems which might mean that your game isn't going to get published. And to talk about this game, we have to go all the way back to 2014, which is almost 11 years ago, very early on in my design career. And this game is called Space Fighters. It's a 2-player dice duel game. And unfortunately, I can't even locate the prototype for this game, it's so old. But essentially, each player has 7 custom dice, and each die is exactly the same as all of them in the game. And you're going to roll these dice, and on each of the face of the dice is essentially a part of a spaceship. It has a symbol, and then it has a certain number of passageways leading out from that room, effectively. And as you roll the dice, you're going to be choosing some of them to keep, and then you're going to fit them together so that the passageways connect up, and you're slowly building out a little spaceship. Once both players have assembled a spaceship in a round, then they automatically fight each other, following predetermined rules. For example, you have lasers and shields. Both players count up the number of lasers they have and compare it to the number of shields their opponent has. If they have more lasers than their opponent has shields, they do 1 damage to them. And effectively, you're trying to reduce your opponent to 0. You start with 6 health points. It's an interesting kind of push your luck style dice game in that one player will roll all their dice, they choose 1, 2, or 3 of them to add to their spaceship, and then they pass to the next player who will roll their dice, choose a certain number of dice. And so as you're playing the game, you actually have a chance to respond to what your opponent's choosing and putting in their ship on your future rolls and try and counter what they're doing. There's also a cog die phase, which either copies whatever it's next to when it's in your ship, but if you roll it in the rolling phase, it actually allows you to take a die out of your ship and re-roll it, so you can even reconfigure things even further than you would normally be able to. It's a fun, pretty fast-paced game, and I actually still really like the game. I have a couple of friends who really enjoy the game. I think I've given some prototypes out to them because they just want a copy to play with. They've enjoyed it that much. But as yet, this one hasn't been published. And there are 2 main reasons why this game hasn't been published in my mind, and that you can learn from with your own prototypes. One is that you've designed too niche a product that has too small a market that would be viable for a publisher to release it. In this case, this is both a 2-player only game and it's a dice game. Both of those factors reduce the number of people who would be interested in buying it, and when you put it together, that intersection of people who are interested in 2-player games and dice games is even smaller. And so it's a tough sell if there isn't a huge market for your game. And perhaps the bigger problem in this game is the manufacturing cost. This game requires custom dice and it requires 14 of them. It's a small game that you would want to sell cheaply, but it has fairly high manufacturing costs. The costs of tooling for a custom die are relatively high. Now, of course, you can get around this if you print enough copies of it because each unit cost is very low. It's the upfront cost of making the toolings for the die in the first place that's very expensive. But that's a lot of risk for a publisher to take on. They would have to be banking on it selling hundreds of thousands of copies for them really to be able to make much of a profit. And so, it's a tough sell. So you can definitely think about in your own games, are there some components in there that are going to make the game particularly expensive? And this is especially important if your game is going to be sold at a cheaper price point. If it's a lighter game, if it's a more family, casual game. If a publisher can't charge very much for it, then they're going to be more sensitive to how expensive it is to make the components that you're putting in the box. If you've got a larger strategy game that's going to be sold for more than $100, then you have a little bit more wiggle room because there is a bit more of a profit margin there and you can have a higher manufacturing cost. But you still have to be aware that you might be asking the publisher to be putting too much into the cost of manufacturing your game to be interested in it. And as for the problem of it being a bit too niche, I'm softening on this idea a little bit. It's interesting that I made this game 11 years ago when 2-player games were really hard to sell. And we've had a bit of a renaissance since then, with a lot of very popular games like Seven Wonders Duel, for instance, really revitalizing the 2-player genre, and now a lot of publishers are interested in publishing 2-player only games. But I think it's the combination of a 2-player game and it being a dice game that just makes it a little too niche. The third reason why you might not be able to pitch your game is that the fun of the game only comes out in the play of it, and it doesn't really pitch well. To illustrate this, we're going to look at my game Good Little Hunters, which I also designed with Brett, and we released it as part of our Good Little Games series, which were a series of print-and-play micro-game card games. This one's from 2017, so that's about 8 years ago, so it's quite a long time ago. In this game, every player has the same 5 cards, the same animal cards, and you're going to be playing cards simultaneously face down, and depending on how the cards get played, certain animals will eat the other animals, knocking out the player who played them, and you're trying to survive to the end of the round to gain food, and it's a race to get a certain amount of food and win the game. The moment when you pitch the game and you say, everyone has a hand of cards, we all put a card face down, And then, in a particular way, we're going to reveal these cards and compare the results. This not only sounds like a lot of other games, which is similar to the first reason I was talking about, why it's difficult to get a game sold, but even more so for this game, it's not particularly obvious why it's fun. It's really only by playing the game multiple times that you start to see the types of strategies that emerge, even though the strategies are pretty small because there aren't a lot of things you can do with 5 cards. This type of game really shines in a really casual kind of pub environment, where players are having fun, trash-talking each other, trying to outwit and double-guess each other with maybe not a lot of information to base it on. Sometimes in a pitching environment, which can be very different to that casual, laid-back pub environment, it can be hard to imagine why that game might be fun. If you just look at the mechanisms as you read it on the page, as you read the rules, it's not obvious why the game is fun. And this can be why maybe your game isn't getting signed. It just doesn't pitch particularly well, or the fun or inventiveness doesn't reveal itself in the rule set. It only reveals itself in play. And that can be tough because the first way a publisher will look at a game is usually by looking at the rules or a gameplay video. It won't be by actually playing the game. And so this can be a reason why your game doesn't get signed. And this one had a particularly woeful time with publishers. It was with a couple of publishers once or twice, but it kept getting dropped. And to date, unfortunately, it hasn't found a home. Or has it? And the fourth problem why your game isn't getting signed is that the promise of the game doesn't match its weight or its complexity. And this is especially problematic if a game appears to be simple, but ends up having very complex, crunchy decisions. You can have a mismatch in the type of audiences that might buy that game or be interested in it, and the audiences that would actually enjoy playing it. And this can be a problem because publishers don't really know how to sell that game. They don't know how to reach the particular market who would be interested in it. And what's worse is they run the risk of the wrong audience buying it in the first place and having a lot of bad reviews early on because of that. To illustrate that, I want to talk about my game 3 Nights, which again was designed with Brett Gilbert. It's another card game, and this one's about, I think, from 2019, so we're talking 6 years. Again, yet to find a publisher, or has it. And this game is a kind of a bluffing game. Every player has the same 3 Knight cards. You have a White Knight, which lets you take 3 cards. You have a Grey Knight and a Dark Knight, which each lets you take 1 card. And over the course of turns, on your turn, you're going to reveal a loot card, which is essentially a type of card that you're going to collect that gives you points for different types of things. And you're going to add it to a central row in the middle of the table. And after you reveal that card and put it in the center of the table, then you can optionally take one of the Knight cards you have and place it face down after that card, taking the next space in that line of cards. And then the next player will take the turn. They'll take a loot card, place it after your loot card or after your Knight, and then make their own choice to play a Knight or to pass. And this keeps going until all the players have played their Knights. Then, starting at the start of the line, we go along and reveal the Knights one by one. And Knights take a number of loot cards, either 3 or 1, and they can only take loot cards that were placed before them in the line. But of course, there has to be something interesting in the game, and the Knight cards work in interesting ways with each other. And this is typified by the Dark Knight. When you reveal a Dark Knight, it takes its card but then moves to the next Knight along the chain. And if that Knight is revealed and it's a White Knight, then the Dark Knight defeats the White Knight, and the White Knight doesn't get to take anything. Normally the White Knight would get to take 3 cards, which is a lot. If the Knight that Dark Knight moved to was a Grey Knight, then the Grey Knight actually gets to take 1 card plus an extra card for every Dark Knight that had travelled and met it. So when you're playing your Knight, you're trying to work out what Knights your opponents might have played before you. Have they played a White Knight or a Dark Knight? And that'll affect your own decisions. You have a little bit of information about what they might have played because each of the Knights can only take certain styles of items. There are some loot cards that can be taken by any Knight, but there are some forbidden items which can't be taken by a White Knight, and there are sacred items which can't be taken by Dark or Grey Knights. So you've got a little bit to go on, but it's a lot of bluffing and counterplay. And while the game flow is very simple, draw a card, put it in the row, choose whether you're going to put a Knight or not, it actually leads to some fairly crunchy decisions. You're trying to work out really hard what's the best Knight to play at a particular time. You don't always have to play a Knight, so you're also trying to make the decision of whether you even play a Knight at all. And this leads to a lot of analysis paralysis sometimes, unfortunately, as you try to think of all the different options of what your opponents might have played and how that will affect what you might play. And because we only reveal all that information at the very end of the round, there's a lot to try and remember and work out as you play through a round. And the kind of feedback that we get from publishers is that it's kind of interesting, but the appearance of the game seems to be much lighter than it actually is. And that's a mismatch between the appearance of the game and its intended audience. And that makes it a really hard sell to a publisher. So try to think about, how am I presenting the game? Am I presenting it in such a way so that it will be enticing to its intended audience? If the appearance of the game and its audience are a match, then that's great, because then the game will be bought by exactly the people who are going to enjoy the game, and hopefully when they play it, they'll enjoy it, and then they'll tell their friends to buy it as well. Whereas if you have a mismatch in that audience, and people who buy the game don't end up enjoying it, they're not going to recommend it to their friends, and even worse, they might leave bad reviews of the game, which will then influence other people to not even try it at all. And the fifth reason why your game might not be signed is the game might be interesting, but might have a fundamental problem or flaw, especially in the flow of a game. One thing I see a lot in prototypes is that the mechanics of the game work fine, all the incentives are aligned, there are interesting decisions for players to take on their turn, but when you actually play the game, there might be one or two moments where something doesn't work quite as you think it should, or you keep getting caught up in a particular action and making a mistake on how it works. Or it might be even a particular component in the game which is particularly cumbersome to use, or it's easy to use that component improperly and mess up the state of the game. To illustrate this, I want to talk about my prototype Poly Engine, which was co-designed with Brett Gilbert, and this one is also about 5 years old at this point. It's a tile-laying engine building game. Each player starts with a player mat, which has a 9x9 grid on it, square grid like this, and in each round of the game you're going to reveal a couple of cards in the middle of the table, and these cards correspond to either the rows or columns of your grid. So for example, you might reveal the 8 card and the C card. Then each player takes one of their workers and places it in an empty space along that row or column. And where they place their worker has a couple of main consequences. If you place your worker so you'll place it next to a building that's already been built on your board, you get to activate that building, getting its benefit. But where you place your worker is also important for another reason, and that's where you come to the second part of your turn. After you've placed your worker and activated any buildings that are adjacent to it, you then can optionally build a new tile onto your board. Tiles cost a certain amount of resources, which you'll be gaining through different effects, but they don't just cost resources, they also cost workers. As you can see on your board, you have some basic buildings, towers, forests, quarries, fisheries, and parks, which you can build at any time effectively. You have an unlimited supply of them. They cost a certain amount of resources, but they also all cost one worker. And what that means is when you place that new tile onto your board, it has to cover the number of workers it requires. So if it requires one worker, you might have a 1x2 tile like the forest. It has to be placed at least over one space where a worker currently was. And when you place that tile, you remove any workers that were used from it and then place the tile on top of it. The fun of the game is you have these other shaped tiles, these bigger tiles, and in every game you have a supply of each type of tile. You have 3 or 4 of them in your own supply, but the effect of that tile and its cost changes in every game, and so that gives a lot of variety to the game. And as you try and build the bigger tiles, they need more workers. So you have to start thinking about where you're placing your workers so that they can be in a shape where you can later lay a tile on top of them that will allow it to be built. Sorry for the slightly long explanation of the game, but it's necessary to illustrate the main flaw in the game and something which has come up from a few publishers we've pitched it to and made us realize that what we thought was a really cool idea maybe isn't as usable in practice as we thought. And the real problem is a problem of flow. When you build a tile on the board, you need to build it on top of some number of workers. And you effectively need to remove those workers and then place the tile on top of it. And you effectively have to remove the workers before you place the tile, because you're effectively placing the tile on top of where the workers are. And you can see even me explaining it sounds slightly convoluted. You have to work out where to place the tile, make sure there's workers there, then you remove those workers, and then you place the tile. And what this means is an otherwise pretty straightforward and fast-flowing game, you have this awkward moment where you have to remember where the workers are, you have to kind of get them out from underneath the tile and then place it on your board. And of course you might have other workers on your board already or other tiles that you don't want to disturb. And so often when you're doing this, you're sort of fumbling it and it can lead to problems with your own player mat as you knock other things over. And so while mechanically it might be quite interesting that the workers kind of determine where you can place the tiles, when it comes to the actual usability in the game and how it flows, you introduce some problems, and unfortunately this has proven a bit of a sticking point with a lot of publishers we've shown it to. It's not something we ever thought about, and maybe one reason we didn't think about it is this game was developed a lot during the pandemic, and so there was a lot of online prototyping and playtesting, in which you don't worry about the physical components so much because you're interacting with them digitally. And this is something that you see in a lot of prototypes now that have been developed digitally in the last few years, which might work really well in a computer when things are being done automatically or you're interacting with them in a different way as you would be able to in the physical world. But then when you try and port them into the real world, they don't really work, or they're not as usable as you think they are. So that's something to think about your game. Are there any moments where the flow is broken, where the physical way you interact with the components isn't very smooth, or is very easy for players to make mistakes, or to screw up the rest of the things they're doing in the game? That can be a real problem. And if it's a key element of the game that you're going to repeat many times, then it's an even bigger problem and perhaps might be insurmountable. And so to date, we haven't been able to find a home for this game. Or have we? So those are some reasons why your game might not be able to get published, or might face some problems in finding a publisher who will be interested in signing it. None of them are deal breakers. There are plenty of games that get published which have less than perfect components, or that are similar to other games on the market, or have a niche audience. And so don't take these as things that you should never do, but they might be some things to reflect on when you've pitched your game a lot of times to different publishers and haven't had any positive responses. And so, for those following along, which of these games was the one that ended up getting published in the end? Do you know which one it was? It was Good Little Hunters. Good Little Hunters became Pray Another Day, published by Edition Spielwasser a couple of years ago. And I did tell the truth, it was with a different publisher before that, and it took many years to finally find a publisher who was interested in the game. But the moment we showed it to Edition Spielwasser, they instantly got what we were trying to do. They saw that fun, casual atmosphere kind of game, and were really into it and wanted to do it immediately. And I think this has to do with their background in running game cafes and understanding the styles of game that do well in that environment, which Pray Another Day was a perfect example of. And to date, it's been really successful. We've sold many thousands of copies all around the world, and we've been very fortunate. And so really the final lesson actually in all of this about why your game might not be able to be published is that you just haven't persevered enough. I always like to say that finding a publisher is just about being in the right place and the right time as much as anything else. It can be that you have a fantastic game, a game that would be worthy of being published, but if you don't find the right publisher and you don't meet them at the right time where they have space in their catalog or they're interested in the particular style of game that you have, then you're not going to be successful. But that's not a sign to give up. Sometimes it takes many years or decades to even find a publisher for a game. And so my final lesson really is actually to persevere with it. If you believe in the game, keep it in the back of your bag, and when you meet new publishers, take it out and see if they're interested. You never know. If you have any prototypes that you've been working on for a long time and have pitched to a lot of publishers, let me know down in the comments below why you think it's not resonating with them, and whether you've given up on it or you're still persevering and pitching it to new publishers. I'd be really interested to know how you're going, and maybe there are ways that we can help each other to improve our games, which I'm always hoping for the community around this channel to be. But until then, thanks very much for watching, and all the best with your game designing. Bye.